Chapter 17. Echoes of Millman. Following the emotional crescendo that was Annie's funeral, the press once again turned their attention to the fate of Peter Wheeler. It was a fixed target, as Wheeler's case languished in legal limbo. In the weeks since Annie's body was discovered, there had been surprisingly little movement in the investigation. Wheeler had been arrested but not yet charged with the killing. Although there was nothing unusual about the case's pace, its glacial progress drove the press corps to distraction. On February 3, 1896, Nicholas Power sat for an in-depth interview with the Halifax Morning Chronicle. Both the interviewer and subject had arrived with their own agendas, each intent on using the exchange for their own benefit. For the reporter, there was the hope of an exclusive, but he would settle for enough to fill his daily quota of ink. As for the detective, it had long been his custom to try his high-profile cases in the media. Power, never the soul of discretion, often bent the rules governing the confidentiality of evidence and leapt at every chance to present his case without the bother of opposing counsel. Throwing caution and Wheeler's rights to the wind, Power laid out the case as it stood. He identified the key witnesses by name and summarized each of their statements. The detective also alluded to crucial pieces of physical evidence at the scene but was unencumbered by specifics. Power forsook the criminal justice system in favor of the less exacting court of public opinion. He pointed to Peter Wheeler and proclaimed him guilty, promising that a perfect chain of evidence will surround the prisoner by the end of the investigation. The interview was a stunning display of unfettered bravado, the dangers of unchallenged slander, and Power's considerable fortune-telling abilities. That the detective knew the outcome before he had finished the investigation spoke volumes regarding his objectivity and professionalism. Press interviews were among the detective's fortes for a simple but compelling reason: Power's preferred mode of argument was analogy. The great man dusted every soundbite with a soupçon of metaphor, allegory, or syllogism. He had discovered in his many years that even a facile comparison or tortured simile was a powerful means of evoking emotion, particularly from an uneducated and undiscerning public. Such ploys played equally well in the courthouse and in the press, two arenas where simplicity and misdirection were encouraged. Power closed his chronicle interview with a pointed and carefully crafted aside. With a casualness intended to pass for spontaneity, Power remarked that the Wheeler investigation was similar to the case of William Millman, the subject of a highly publicized trial in neighboring Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. For almost a year, from July 1887 through April 1888, the Maritimes had been riveted to the sanguinary tale of Millman, accused of killing 17-year-old Mary Pickering Tuplan. July 4, 1887, was unseasonably hot in the otherwise beatific glen of Irishtown Margate, sitting like a buckle on the Isle's midsection, and the oppressive heat drove villagers to the banks of the Southwest River in search of relief. The bathers' dreams of a languid afternoon on the rocks were soon dashed when the bloated corpse of a teenage girl bobbed silently into view. Local men scrambled to find the grappling hooks needed to dredge the poor girl's remains from the muddy water. Any notions that the death was an accidental drowning were quickly dispelled. A boat anchor stone had been tied to her waist to prevent her from floating to the surface. There was also no question as to the girl's identity. Those gathered on the shore recognized her at once, in spite of the deplorable state of the body. She was Mary Tuplan, a pretty and popular teen who had disappeared from her home on June 28. The anchor stone was not the lone sign of malfeasance. A coroner's inquest revealed that Mary had died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The examining physician declared that the first shot, a near-contact wound that entered behind her right ear, had merely stunned her, while the second shot to the back of the head proved fatal. A far more shocking revelation was to follow: the unmarried teen was 6 months pregnant. Suspicion soon fell on Willie Millman, a 20-year-old man who lived across the river from the Tuplans. Although Willie had only met Mary 3 times before she died, he was widely rumored to be the father of her child. The pair first locked eyes at a New Year's Eve party, an annual extravaganza hosted by the town's resident maven Frances Hillman. The comely young Mary flirted openly with the boisterous fiddle-playing Millman. The two danced and drank the night away and eventually gave the party's chaperones the slip. As dawn broke on New Year's Day, Willie walked Mary home. 2 months later, Mary's worst fears were realized when the doctor confirmed she was pregnant. A terrified Mary confided in her sister that William Millman was the father. Although Mary's voluminous clothes hid her growing shame, her was the father. Although Mary's voluminous clothes hid her growing shame, her sister was far less discreet. Village gossip ran rampant, and on June 26, an angry mob confronted Willie about the rumor during church services. He vehemently denied being the father. That evening, he called on Mary at her home, hoping to make things right, and the couple went for a walk. This time, Mary chose not to share the details of their conversation with her sister. Mary's delicate condition was soon overshadowed by a far darker family tragedy. On June 27, one of Mary's brothers succumbed to a lingering illness. The funeral was held on Tuesday, June 28. After burying their beloved son and brother, the grief-ravaged Tuplins returned from the cemetery in the late afternoon. As the family received mourners in their home just after 8 p.m., Mary slipped from the house, never to return. By 10 p.m., the alarm was raised and the search for the missing girl began in earnest. Villagers pulled the girl's lifeless body from the river 1 week later. Mary's murder captured headlines throughout the Maritimes. When the press learned she was pregnant, the story spread across Canada and America. In press interviews, the victim's sister painted Millman as the prime suspect when she named him as the father of the unborn child. Further aspersions were cast when it was learned that Millman was the only man in the village who refused to participate in the search for the missing girl. Like Wheeler, the evidence against Millman was purely circumstantial. Willie lived near the Tuplins and the pair were acquainted, by all reports quite intimately. Yet despite the paucity of hard evidence, things did not look good for young William. He could not account for his whereabouts between 7 o'clock and 10:30 p.m. on the night of the murder. He told investigators he had stayed home alone while his parents attended a gathering at the Irishtown Anglican Church. Much was made of the fact that Willie owned a .22 caliber gun, although this was rendered moot when police confirmed that the bullets used to kill Mary were fired from a .32. One day after the papers reported the bullet discrepancy, a man came forward to police as if cued by a stage director. Francis Power, no relation to the infamous Halifax super sleuth, told the detectives that on June 30, 2 days after the murder, Willie Millman had finally returned the .32 caliber pistol Power had lent him back in May. Power's damning revelation erased any lingering doubts the public had regarding Millman's guilt. On July 4, mere hours before Mary's body was discovered, Willie Millman made his first ever trip to the big city of Charlottetown. He was in dire need of a lawyer and Willie had learned the hard way that the local barristers were already squarely against him because of the pregnancy rumors. Millman told his new attorney that Mary's father was leveling grave accusations against him. The meeting was meant to be a simple consultation regarding slander and paternity, but by the time Willie returned home, locals had recovered Mary's body and Millman's legal troubles had grown far more serious. A preliminary hearing was held in Clifton 3 days later. A grand jury was LLDDTHTTDTHIDIT impaneled and the prosecutor presented the evidence against Millman. The media were whipped into a lather when the accused's father, John Millman, took the stand. Recanting his prior statements, Millman Sr. perjured himself by claiming he was home with Willie at the time of the murder. When confronted with his overt deception, John Millman literally swooned on the witness stand. As his father fainted, Willie broke down, becoming hysterical and screaming uncontrollably. Several observers in the courtroom claimed to have heard statements that could be construed as admissions of guilt in the midst of his rant. In spite or perhaps because of Millman's histrionics, the jury returned a true bill indicting Willie for the murder of Mary Pickering Tuplin. The case was remanded to the Prince Edward Island Supreme Court, and on July 8, Willie was delivered to the Queens County Jail to await his fate. The trial of William Millman began in Charlottetown on January 24, 1888. The Honorable Joseph Hansley presided. The Crown's theory was straightforward. After 8 p.m. on June 28, Millman took a Red Oyster boat belonging to John Cousins from its usual mooring on the north bank of the Southwest River. He pulled across the water, bringing the boat to rest near Mud Road. The Tuplin house sat at the intersection of Mud and Princetown Roads. With the borrowed .32 caliber in his pocket, Willie met Mary at her gate and the pair walked down the road toward the boat. After a heated argument about the pregnancy, Millman shot Mary twice in the head. Several neighbors reported hearing the gunshots. Willie put Mary's body in the boat, tied the anchor stone to her waist and pulled to the deepest part of the river, where he sank the body off Thompson's Point. Millman then returned the boat to its usual spot, minus the anchor stone. All agreed Millman had a strong motive to kill Mary, fear that her pregnancy would be exposed and he would be fined or imprisoned under the Seduction Act. Still, the evidence against Millman remained circumstantial. Only one witness, a 13-year-old girl named Dorothy Adams, placed Millman anywhere near the scene at the time of the murder. Adams, who knew Millman well, testified that she had seen Willie tie up the boat on the night in question. Under questioning, Millman conceded he was at the river that evening. He told the court he was only there briefly to go swimming after dinner and had returned home before 9 p.m. As with the Wheeler case, footprints would play a vital role in the trial of Willie Millman. Police Constable Alexander McKay took the stand and declared that he had matched some boot tracks found on the riverbank to Millman's shoes. The defense scored a major victory when they forced McKay to concede he had measured the prints by gouging marks into a stick. The courtroom erupted when a direct comparison of the stick to Millman's shoes revealed that Willie's feet were far too large to have made the sandy footprints. Despite his lawyer's best efforts, the jury found Millman guilty of murder. Upon hearing the verdict, Millman fainted. Like his father before him, Willie's dizzy spell brought the court proceedings to a crashing halt. Willie Millman returned to court 3 days later for sentencing. As the judge read the verdict, the prisoner stuck his fingers in his ears and began humming to avoid hearing his fate. Although the jury recommended mercy for Willie because of his young age, the judge had grown tired of Millman's antics. Justice Hansley sentenced him to death. Millman's childish behavior may have enraged the judge, but it initially endeared him to his jailers. Unlike most condemned prisoners, Millman was not kept in irons for the first 2 months of his incarceration. It was a near-fatal error. In late March, Willie struck his jailer over the head with a bottle and attempted to escape, but his liberty was short-lived. He was quickly recaptured when he could not find his way out of the enclosed jail yard. Both convict and jailer had learned a painful lesson, and Millman spent his remaining days in shackles. In the early morning of April 12, 1887, the executioner made his way to a makeshift gallows in the normally peaceful confines of Connaught Square, then part of the jail complex in downtown Charlottetown. A hastily assembled crowd of 50, including the coroner's jury, were brought in to witness Willie's demise. At the prisoner's own request, Millman was blindfolded before leaving his cell so he would not see the gallows. It did not help. Millman wailed and wept openly as he was led to the scaffold. At 8:08 a.m., the signal was given and Millman was hanged. Tradition held that a black flag be raised above the jail when the deed was done. Millman's flag was raised at 8:10 a.m. Unfortunately, Millman was not quite dead. At 8:19 a.m., the attending physician still detected a faint pulse and respiratory effort. Finally, after he had been left hanging for more than 15 minutes, Millman was pronounced dead and cut free of the noose. While Nicholas Power no doubt left the interview feeling well pleased with himself, his tell-all proved to be one of his biggest media missteps in the Bear River case. The detective's allusion to the Millman case missed the mark and provoked an unintended negative backlash. Power had referenced Millman in the hopes of condemning Wheeler by association. Unfortunately for Power, the link Bear Riverites made was between the two victims. By raising the specter of Mary Pickering Tuplin, an unwed pregnant teenager of demonstrably loose morals, the detective had inadvertently sullied the reputation of the beloved and virtuous Annie. Red-faced, Power was forced to qualify his statement, insisting that, unlike her predecessor, Annie Kempton bore a most excellent character. She was very industrious, hard-working, and was well-liked by everyone in the village. In trying to tar Wheeler with the Millman brush, Power had accidentally painted Annie Kempton scarlet.